The small town was alive with excitement that morning. Dust rose from the dirt roads as wagons and horses arrived, bringing people from the surrounding countryside. Men in worn hats and women in plain dresses mingled, laughing and greeting friends they hadn't seen in months. The air smelled of horses, leather, and fresh bread from a nearby stall. Everyone seemed to be talking about the auction, where land, livestock, and a few special items were set to be sold. Among all the expected excitement, there was one unusual addition that had drawn quiet curiosity from some and whispered disapproval from others. A young Comanche woman stood at the edge of the crowd, unsure of what was about to happen. She was unlike anyone else there. Her hair was long and black, neatly braided over her shoulder, and her eyes held a mixture of fear and dignity. She had been raised to understand the ways of her people, strong and proud. Yet here she was, facing something foreign and uncomfortable. The crowd did not know her story, and she had no voice in this gathering, except the small, uncertain one she carried inside her. She stood with her hands folded in front of her, trying to keep her composure as she watched the auctioneer prepare the stage. The auctioneer was a tall man with a booming voice, full of confidence. He moved with practiced energy, calling out bids for livestock first, then land. People shouted numbers, jostled each other slightly, and laughed when someone outbid another. It was a normal day for them, filled with the usual excitement of trade and competition. But when the auctioneer moved to the next item, something unusual happened. The crowd fell silent. The Comanche woman stepped forward, and the murmurs began. Some whispered about her beauty, some about her quiet nature, and a few, feeling uncomfortable, made jokes under their breath. The auctioneer cleared his throat and raised his hand to regain attention. "Now, friends," he said, "we have something a little different today. A young woman, ready to be married. Who will bid for her?" The words hung in the air, and the sound of silence grew heavier. Some people shifted uncomfortably, while others stared in curiosity. No one spoke. The usual clamor of the auction was gone. The men in the crowd looked at each other, unsure. They had the means, the confidence, and the opportunity to bid. But for some reason, no one stepped forward. It was as if a quiet, invisible barrier had fallen over them, stopping them from acting. The young woman felt every eye on her, and the weight of it pressed down like a physical force. Her heart raced, and she clenched her hands tighter. She wanted to be brave, to look proud, but the tension made her knees feel weak. Each passing moment felt like an hour. She had been prepared for this, but preparation did not make it easier. She had heard the stories of auctions before, the unfairness and judgment. Yet this was her reality. She kept her chin high, refusing to let fear show, even as the crowd's whispers made her stomach churn. Among the crowd, a man stood slightly apart from the others. He was not loud, not flashy, and did not seek attention. He had come to the auction as he usually did, to observe and sometimes bid on livestock or tools. People in town knew him as a quiet rancher, a man of steady hands and steady character. He worked hard on his land and with his animals, never needing the praise or recognition others sought. Today, he watched the unusual scene with a steady gaze. He noticed the young woman's bravery, the way she stood despite the tension and humiliation. He felt a quiet pull of responsibility, a sense that someone had to act. The auctioneer grew impatient. "Come on, friends," he shouted. "Don't let her stand here all day. Who will bid?" His voice was firm, but even he seemed unsure now. The men in the front row shifted, looking at one another. Each had thought of stepping forward, but hesitated. Perhaps they feared the opinion of the crowd. Or perhaps they had never faced something like this before. The silence stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable, until even the usually confident auctioneer had nothing more to say. The young woman's eyes scanned the crowd, looking for a sign of hope. Every glance seemed to fall on someone else, someone who might help, someone who might change the course of this awkward, painful moment. She felt her chest tighten, wondering if she would stand here all day, unwanted and alone. Her heart sank with each passing second, yet she remained still, unwilling to give in to despair entirely. She drew in a deep breath, holding it as if it could shield her from the judgment surrounding her. The quiet rancher continued to watch. He noticed her poise, her dignity, and the way she refused to let fear rule her. His mind wandered back to his own experiences, the hardships of the land, the lonely days working without recognition, the people he had helped quietly, without any need for thanks. Something stirred inside him, a firm belief that no one deserved to be treated with disregard, especially not someone so courageous in the face of fear. Finally, he stepped forward. It was not a dramatic gesture. He did not shout or announce himself. He moved with calm purpose, his boots stirring a small cloud of dust as he approached the auction block. Heads turned, eyes widened, and whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Who is that? Is he really going to bid? Why now? The auctioneer paused, unsure whether to continue, and all eyes shifted to the quiet man who had just moved forward. The young woman looked up, startled. Her heart raced, not because of fear this time, but because of hope, the faintest flicker of relief lighting her eyes. She could not yet understand the man's intention, but his presence alone seemed to break the oppressive silence. It was as if a small window had opened in the tense room, letting in a breath of air she had thought impossible. The crowd waited, holding its collective breath. The auctioneer cleared his throat again, glancing at the man who now stood confidently in front of the block. "Sir?" he asked. "Do you wish to bid?" The man nodded once, firmly, without a word. That single motion spoke volumes. The crowd murmured, unsure how to react. Some were impressed by his courage, others curious about his reasoning, and a few still skeptical of the unusual situation. The young woman's pulse quickened. She had not expected anyone to step forward. Her mind raced with questions, yet a small smile began to form on her lips. Relief mixed with cautious hope, a sensation she had not felt in a long time. She could see the difference between this man and the rest of the crowd. He did not act out of pride or showiness. He acted quietly, deliberately, and with respect. That distinction mattered more than words could express. The auctioneer, regaining his composure, raised his hand to start the bidding officially. "Very well," he said. "We have a bid. Let us see if anyone else will follow." The room remained tense, but a few eyes glanced toward the man, sensing something unusual. No one moved. The crowd, which had been so eager to witness a spectacle, now watched with a different kind of curiosity. They were no longer focused on the auction as entertainment, but on the act of courage unfolding before them. The young woman stood a little taller now, feeling the weight of the moment shift. She had not expected this, not in 1,000 quiet thoughts before this day. And yet, here, it was a man who saw her, not as a curiosity, not as an object of amusement, but as a person deserving respect and dignity. It was a small step, but one that meant everything. The quiet rancher returned to his place near the block, standing tall and steady. He did not boast. He did not speak loudly. But the strength of his action was clear. He had stepped forward when others had faltered, and in that choice, he had begun to change the course of the young woman's life. The crowd, sensing the shift, whispered among themselves, unsure how to react, but intrigued by the display of quiet courage. The young woman inhaled deeply and exhaled slowly, letting her tension ease just a little. She had not yet stepped down, had not yet been offered comfort or guidance, but for the first time that day, she felt a flicker of hope. It was enough to steady her heart and remind her that even in the most difficult moments, kindness and courage could appear unexpectedly and in the quietest of places. As the sun climbed higher, casting light on the dusty auction ground. The silence lingered, but it was no longer heavy or oppressive. It carried a new weight now, one of anticipation, of curiosity, and of a subtle promise that things might change. The quiet rancher had made the first move, and though the rest of the story had yet to unfold, the first act of bravery had been written in the hearts of everyone present. The auctioneer raised his gavel slowly, signaling the crowd to pay attention. "Who will bid next?" he asked. But the words sounded different this time. There was a tension, yes, but also a sense that the story had already begun, that the future might take a turn no one expected, and all eyes returned to the quiet rancher, waiting, wondering, and perhaps learning that sometimes the smallest, quietest action could carry the greatest weight. And there he stood, calm and steady, ready to do what was right, even when no one else would. The young woman met his gaze, and in that single moment, something shifted. The air seemed lighter, the tension eased, and the possibility of a new beginning, however uncertain, touched both their hearts. The quiet rancher's decision had set the entire auction ground abuzz, even though he had spoken no words. The murmurs of the crowd slowly died down as people watched him step forward with quiet determination. The young Comanche woman felt a strange mix of relief and nervous anticipation. She had feared standing there all day without anyone showing interest. But now, someone had. Someone who seemed to care. Not for wealth or status, but for her dignity. The auctioneer raised his gavel and looked around, as if expecting another bidder to challenge the quiet rancher. But no one moved. The men in the front row shifted uneasily, uncertain what to do. The women in the crowd whispered to one another, noting the calm courage of the man who had taken the first step. The auctioneer cleared his throat and nodded toward the rancher. "It seems we have our bid," he said. "Do you confirm?" The rancher nodded once, firm and steady. His eyes met the young woman's for a brief moment, and she saw no arrogance, no pride, only respect. She nodded slightly in return, a small smile breaking through her nervous expression. In that silent exchange, something shifted. It was not a fairy tale instant, but it was real. A spark of hope and understanding that could grow into something meaningful. As the crowd began to disperse, still murmuring about the unusual turn of events, the young woman stepped down from the auction block. The rancher remained at her side, guiding her gently through the dusty ground. He did not rush her, did not speak loudly to draw attention, but his quiet confidence gave her strength. People stared, whispered, and some even shook their heads in disbelief, but the rancher paid no mind. What mattered to him was right in front of him, a person who deserved dignity, care, and a chance at a new life. They walked together to the rancher's wagon. Along the way, he introduced himself softly, explaining that he was known as a rancher in the nearby area, and that he had seen her courage and strength, qualities he deeply respected. The young woman listened carefully, feeling a sense of safety she had not known for many weeks. Her name was spoken aloud for the first time in this moment of freedom, and it felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of her identity. The journey back to the ranch was quiet but not uncomfortable. The rancher drove the wagon slowly, and the young woman gazed at the passing fields, watching the cattle grazing and the wind moving gently through the grass. The silence was not awkward. It was a companionable peace. For the first time that day, she felt a flicker of relief and the faintest sense of belonging. The rancher occasionally spoke of simple things, his animals, the weather, the work required to maintain the land, but never in a way that made her feel less than equal. Upon arriving at the ranch, the young woman noticed the simplicity of life there. The wooden fences, the modest farmhouse, and the wide-open fields spoke of honest labor and steady care. The rancher introduced her to the animals gently, explaining the routines and responsibilities without making her feel overwhelmed. He showed patience, understanding that she needed time to adjust, and that respect, not command, was the way to earn trust. Over the next days and weeks, life settled into a rhythm. The young woman learned the routines of ranch work, helping feed animals, mend fences, and tend to the small vegetable garden. The rancher worked alongside her, never demanding, always guiding, offering small words of encouragement. Slowly, the young woman began to trust him more. She found comfort in the predictability of the work and the quiet reliability of her companion. The rancher, in turn, grew to appreciate her skills, intelligence, and quiet strength. He saw how she adapted to the new environment, how she observed carefully before acting, and how she treated the animals with gentle hands. Her courage at the auction had been remarkable, but her consistent effort and patience now showed a different kind of bravery, one that built trust and partnership. The townspeople began to notice the change as well. At first, there were whispers of curiosity and skepticism. They had watched the unusual auction with fascination and judgment, but over time, as they saw the rancher treating the young woman with respect, and as she demonstrated her own resilience and independence, opinions began to shift. Neighbors who had been doubtful or even critical began to nod politely, and some offered assistance when needed. The couple's quiet integrity gradually influenced the community, proving that respect and fairness could inspire more than loud words ever could. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting golden light across the fields, the young woman and the rancher sat outside the farmhouse. They shared a simple meal and spoke softly about their pasts, their hopes, and the work ahead. The rancher listened intently as she recounted stories of her childhood and the lessons she had learned from her people. He shared tales of the land, of the hard work it required, and of the satisfaction that came from caring for something with patience and attention. Through these conversations, they began to understand each other deeply. Trust grew, not through grand gestures, but through shared moments, quiet words, and mutual respect. The young woman realized that her life had changed not because of wealth or social standing, but because someone had recognized her worth and treated her with kindness. The rancher learned that courage and dignity could come in many forms, and that true partnership required patience, understanding, and care. Challenges still came, as they always do. Harsh weather threatened the crops and animals. Unexpected repairs required long hours of work, and occasional prejudice from outsiders tested their patience. Yet, together, they faced each difficulty with steady hands and clear hearts. The young woman's adaptability and the rancher's experience complemented each other, creating a team that was stronger than either could have been alone. Each success, each small triumph, built confidence and respect between them. Over time, laughter returned to the ranch in abundance. They shared simple joys, watching the sunset over the fields, celebrating a successful harvest, and enjoying quiet evenings by the fire. Moments of humor and warmth became common, and the young woman's initial fear and uncertainty began to fade. She found herself thinking not of what had happened at the auction, but of the life she was building now, one filled with dignity, respect, and a sense of purpose. The quiet rancher, once a man of solitary labor, discovered a new depth of satisfaction. He realized that life was richer when shared with someone who understood the value of honesty, courage, and kindness. He admired the young woman's resilience, her quiet determination, and her ability to find balance and peace, even in a world that had often been harsh and unfair. Their partnership was not born of spectacle or societal pressure, but of shared values and mutual respect, a bond that grew stronger each day. As months passed, neighbors and travelers began to visit the ranch more frequently. They were drawn not only by curiosity, but by the reputation of a household built on fairness and integrity. The young woman and the rancher welcomed visitors warmly, demonstrating through actions rather than words the importance of empathy, patience, and understanding. The lessons of that auction day, about courage, dignity, and quiet strength, spread naturally through the community. In the evenings, as the ranch grew quiet and the stars filled the sky. The young woman and the rancher often sat together outside, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. They did not dwell on the hardships or unfairness of the past, but rather celebrated the choices that had led to growth, understanding, and partnership. They recognized that courage could be quiet, that respect could speak louder than words, and that true strength often lay in compassion and patience. Life on the ranch continued with steady rhythm, filled with work, laughter, and quiet contentment. The young woman learned to care for the land and the animals with skill and dedication, and the rancher learned that sharing life with someone of such courage and integrity brought its own profound rewards. They faced the world together, not as a spectacle for others' amusement, but as equals, partners, and friends who had chosen to stand by each other in both challenges and joys. And so, the story that began with uncertainty and fear at the auction ended not in spectacle or judgment, but in quiet triumph. The young woman found safety, respect, and belonging, while the rancher discovered the richness of partnership and shared purpose. Together, they demonstrated that courage and kindness could overcome doubt, that integrity could inspire others, and that true character was measured not by wealth or status, but by how one treated others in moments of vulnerability. Their story became a quiet legend in the town, a reminder that even in difficult circumstances, a single act of courage and respect could change the course of a life. And though the auction would be remembered by many for its unusual circumstances, it was the choices of a quiet rancher and a courageous young woman that left the lasting mark. A story of dignity, partnership, and hope that would be told for generations.